Step 1. Disassembling the trigger. Unhook the cartridge drop lever spring from the cartridge drop lever. Push through the trigger pin bushing from left to right to remove the carrier, cartridge drop lever, breech bolt latch and breech bolt latch pin. If you have our auto-loading lifter installed, take care to avoid the torsion spring pinging off and becoming lost. Decock the hammer. Also, take care as the hammer shifts position on the hammer spring cap to avoid the hammer spring cap and the hammer spring pinging off and becoming lost. Remove cartridge drop lever and lifter. Remove the hammer spring cap and the hammer spring. Push through the front trigger pin from left to right, just enough to allow the trigger to be lifted out. The trigger pin will continue to hold the cartridge drop lever spring in place. Remove the trigger spring. Whilst holding the disconnector to avoid it pinging off, remove the disconnector pin. Remove the disconnector. Remove the disconnector plunger and remove the disconnector spring. Next, we need to install and test the safety adjustment screw. Insert the Allen key through your J. Kenny & Co trigger. Place the J. Kenny & Co safety adjustment screw on the Allen key. Whilst applying pressure to hold it in place, turn the Allen key counterclockwise until the safety adjustment screw stops on the trigger. Insert your original disconnector spring and disconnector plunger into the J. Kenny & Co trigger. Install the J. Kenny & Co disconnector using your original disconnector pin. Take care to hold the disconnector in place as it becomes under spring tension to avoid it pinging off and becoming lost. Installing the disconnector. Place a J. Kenny & Co disconnector grub screw onto the Allen key and screw it clockwise into the hole on the underside of the trigger, directly under the disconnector. Continue turning the disconnector adjustment screw clockwise. You will feel the screw touch the disconnector and then the disconnector will move slightly. Stop at this point. You should wind the screw in until the disconnector lifts away from the trigger and there is a gap between the disconnector and its stop point on the trigger. Remove the rear trigger pin from the trigger group. Insert the J. Kenny & Co trigger spring into the front underside of the trigger. Whilst holding the trigger upside down, insert it into the trigger group. Notice how the front of the trigger is still in a slightly raised position in the trigger group. Reinsert the front trigger pin. While slightly depressing the trigger, reinsert the rear trigger pin. Insert your original hammer spring and hammer spring cap. Insert your J. Kenny & Co hammer and retain it in place by inserting, from right to left, the trigger pin bushing. Cock the hammer by pulling it backwards until it locks into place. Push the safety to the on position. While asserting a gentle holding pressure on the hammer, pull the trigger. The hammer should not fall. If there's too much play, the hammer will drop while it's unsafe. If the hammer falls when the safety is on, insert the Allen key through the front of the trigger. Turn the safety adjustment screw in a clockwise direction. This will adjust the play in the trigger. Keep adjusting until the screw comes into contact with the safety. To test it, while asserting a gentle holding pressure on the hammer, pull the trigger. The hammer should not fall. Repeat as necessary. If there's still excessive play, like there is in this case, you may wish to remove the trigger from the trigger group and continue screwing it from outside of the trigger group. When the position of the safety adjustment screw is correct, there will be only the slightest movement from the trigger when pulled and the hammer will not drop. The safety will move freely on and off. Please test it multiple times. And pull the trigger to ensure the hammer does not drop when the safety is on. Continue testing the safety to ensure that it moves freely on and off. If the hammer does not fall when the safety is off or the safety does not move freely, ensure the safety is in the off position if possible. Insert the Allen key through the front of the trigger. Turn the safety adjustment screw in a counterclockwise direction. To test it, while asserting a gentle holding pressure on the hammer, pull the trigger. The hammer should fall. Repeat as necessary. When the position of the safety adjustment screw is correct, when the trigger is pulled, the hammer will drop. The safety will move freely on and off. Please test it multiple times. If there is too much play between the safety adjustment screw and the safety, the gun will fire while it is unsafe. It must not fire while it is unsafe. Once again, make sure that the safety moves freely and the gun does not fire while it's unsafe. To lock the safety adjustment screw in place, remove the trigger from the trigger group. Place a J. Kenny & Co. grub screw onto the Allen key. Add a small amount of medium strength thread lock, do not use high strength. Screw the grub screw clockwise into the hole on the trigger directly opposite the safety adjustment screw. Continue turning the grub screw clockwise until it's seated snugly against the safety adjustment screw. Stop at this point. Clean off any excess thread locker. Insert the trigger back into the trigger group and test the function of the safety adjustment screw again, just as you did previously. After you have installed the locking screw and fitted the trigger back into the trigger group, perform a function test again on the safety to ensure it's working properly. Make sure the gun does not fire when the safety is engaged, and that it does fire when the safety is off. To check the function of the disconnector, pull the trigger, then cock the hammer. If when the hammer cocks back it does not lock into the trigger properly, as shown, it means that there is not enough play on the disconnector. Adjust the screw by turning it clockwise to raise the disconnector away from the hammer. As you adjust the screw, winding it clockwise will move the disconnector further away. Loosening it anti-clockwise will bring the disconnector closer. Repeat this process until the hammer locks into the correct position. To further test the functionality of the disconnector, while the hammer is decocked, pull the trigger and apply pressure to keep the trigger fully pulled. Pull the hammer back completely and then release it. If the hammer doesn't catch while the trigger is held down, as shown in this example, it means that the adjustment screw on the disconnector has been tightened too much and is not properly catching the hammer. As you can see here, the disconnector is not catching the hammer. In this case, turn the adjustment screw anti-clockwise slightly and perform the test again. If the hammer does catch the disconnector when it's cocked back, but releases as soon as the trigger is released, it means there isn't enough contact between the disconnector and the hammer. Therefore, the adjustment screw should be turned anti-clockwise slightly further. If, as shown in this example, the hammer still falls as the trigger is released, it indicates that there is still insufficient contact between the disconnector and the hammer. The adjustment screw must be loosened further anti-clockwise. With the trigger pulled fully and held down, cock the hammer. The disconnector should catch the hammer. As the trigger is slowly released, the hammer should catch on the front of the trigger, indicating that everything's working properly. With the trigger pulled fully and held down, cock the hammer. The hammer should catch on the disconnector. Once the trigger is released, the hammer should catch on the trigger, completing the cycling process. The disconnector is now properly fitted and ready to receive its locking screw. Take the small grub screw and place it on your Allen key. Apply some medium strength thread locker such as blue Loctite. Do not use high strength. Place a small amount onto the locking screw and install the locking screw behind the adjustment screw of the disconnector and tighten it until it is nipped. Clean off the excess Loctite, reinstall and double check the function of the disconnector as before. Now that both locking screws have been installed into both the safety adjustment screw and the disconnector adjustment screw, double check the overall function of the trigger by making sure the gun does not fire while it's on safe. Make sure the safety functions and moves freely. Fire the trigger, hold the trigger down and pull the hammer back. Make sure the hammer catches on the disconnector. Release the trigger as slowly as possible and make sure the hammer catches on the trigger. Pull the trigger as if you are firing the gun and repeat this process 5 or 6 times. For another 5 or 6 repetitions, quickly release the trigger, checking the trigger is functioning properly and safely. With the trigger group installed back into the gun, check again that the gun fires. Keep the trigger pulled to the rear. Pull the bolt back, keep the trigger pulled, and close the bolt. Slowly release the trigger and make sure the trigger resets properly and fires. Check multiple times, releasing the trigger slowly and quickly to ensure the disconnector is functioning correctly. Then check your safety and ensure that the gun cannot fire while it's on safe. The trigger is now installed. Once you have checked function with the trigger group both outside and inside of the gun, you can now apply a small amount of oil to both the disconnector and the hammer engagement surfaces. The hammer is now lubricated and ready to use.